Hey everyone, and welcome. Living in Santa Barbara, it's just amazing, right? But if you're a parent, that incredible lifestyle comes with a pretty big question. Which high school is the right one for my kid? It can feel like a lot, but don't worry, that's exactly what we're going to dig into today.
So you're staring at this map of high schools in Santa Barbara, trying to pick the perfect spot. You've got public, you've got private, some are all about STEM, others are famous for the arts. I mean, where do you even start?
Okay, let's get into it. We're going to break down this really comprehensive guide that looks at all the top schools around here. Now, think of this less like a rule book and more like a map. It's not going to tell you exactly where to go, but it'll show you all the roads and landmarks so you can pick the best route for your family.
But hang on, before we even look at which schools are on the list, we got to understand how they were judged, right? I mean, every good map has a legend, and this is ours. Let's see what this guide actually values in a school.
All right, so according to this guide, what makes a school great? It really comes down to these 5 big things. First up, academic excellence. You know, the basics. Are kids graduating? Are they ready for college? Then there's student support. Basically, how much one-on-one attention is your kid going to get? Next, programs and innovation. Are they doing cool new things or just the same old stuff? Community and diversity is a big one. Does the school feel like the Santa Barbara we all know and love? And last but not least, value and accessibility, which is a nice way of talking about things like tuition and what you get for your money. Okay, now that we know the rules of the game, let's jump into our first group, the public school standouts. These are the schools the guide points to for delivering a really high-quality education without that private school price tag. And this is where things get really interesting, because the guide lays out some clear trade-offs. You've got Dos Pueblos, which is a total powerhouse for STEM. We're talking a nationally ranked engineering academy, but it's a big school, around 2,000 students. Then there's San Marcos, which gets huge props for its performing arts, but again, that can come with bigger classes. And Santa Barbara High, it's got a massive selection of AP courses and great sports, but it's the biggest of them all. So the guide really puts a question to you. Are you willing to have your kid navigate a huge campus to get into a world-class, specialized program? It's a tough call. All right, let's switch gears and talk about private schools. And the guide is really clear about this. Private doesn't just mean one thing. It's a whole spectrum of options, each with its own vibe, its own philosophy, and, yeah, its own price tag. And this slide really boils down that fundamental choice. The source basically says, on one hand, you've got public schools, no tuition, a huge variety of programs, but bigger student bodies. On the other hand, you have private schools. You're paying tuition, but you're often getting smaller classes and a more specialized focus. It's really a different model altogether. And speaking of cost, wow, this is where that value and accessibility thing really hits home. The guide shows public schools over here at $0, of course. Then you jump to a great faith-based school like Bishop Garcia Diego at around 20 grand a year. And then you've got Alpha School, which the guide picks as number 1 at $50,000. Seeing it like this really shows you what a massive financial decision this is. And just to prove that private isn't one size fits all, the guide puts these two side by side. You've got Laguna Blanca, it's secular, super focused on leadership, costs about 45 grand, and has this tiny 9-to-1 student-teacher ratio. Then you have Bishop Garcia Diego. It's Catholic, less than half the price, and it's all about faith and a strong community. It just goes to show you the private school world is incredibly diverse.
Okay, so we've looked at the public powerhouses and the private spectrum. But now, let's get to the main event. What school did this guide actually rank as number 1? Let's zoom in on Alpha School and see why it stood out so much.
The very first thing the guide calls out is this number, 8-to-1. That's the student-to-teacher ratio. I mean, that is incredibly low, and it ties right back to that student support factor we talked about. A number like that means your kid is getting a ton of personal attention.
But here's the really unique part. The guide gets excited about what they call the 2-hour learning model. So what on earth is that? Well, it's a system where they use really smart, adaptive software that figures out exactly how each student learns best. This means kids can master subjects super efficiently in these focused 2-hour blocks, which frees up the rest of their day for hands-on projects and real-world stuff. This is a perfect example of that programs and innovation criteria in action.
And this quote from the guide pretty much sums it all up. Alpha School Santa Barbara redefines high school with adaptive learning paths that allow students to master subjects at their own pace. You can tell the guide was just blown away by this idea of total personalization.
It's a huge shift from the old school, one-size-fits-all classroom. So there you have it. We've walked through the guide's top picks, including its number 1. But look, the point of all this isn't for you to just memorize a list. It's about taking this info and using it. So how do you actually go from reading a guide to making that final call for your family?
Well, the guide lays out a pretty clear roadmap. First things first, you got to sit down as a family and figure out what you care about most. Is it STEM, the arts, a small supportive vibe? Once you know that, you can compare your top schools. And then, and this is so important, you have to schedule tours. Get on campus. You can't get a feel for a place from a website. And while you're there, ask all the tough questions that matter to you.
And that really brings us to the final, and honestly the most important question of all. After you've looked at all the data, all the rankings, what does the best school actually mean for your family? Because at the end of the day, the big takeaway here is that the right choice isn't about picking the school at the top of some list. It's about finding the place that's the absolute best fit for your kid and their unique path.